Good afternoon. I want to welcome you here. I get to introduce Wendy, although I think I'll let Wendy introduce herself, do a much better job than I would. But Wendy Park is Executive Director of Care Impact, and I'll let you explain what that's all about. That would make a lot more sense. And but before we begin, why don't we bow for prayer and we'll pray. Lord, I want to thank you for Wendy. I thank you for her heart for people and for welcoming in the stranger. I pray that you would bless her as she shares with us, help us to be open to what she's saying. And I just pray that your spirit would work in each one of our lives, both personally and as we lead our churches. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Great. We'll just maybe put that on the stand because if people have questions, we're going to use the mic because we have some online people and we don't want to make them feel strange among us. And I'll invite you to come say your question or interaction on the mic as much as we can. Welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you. As was mentioned, my name is Wendy Park, and I'm going to get right to it and do bragging rights. I'm the daughter of guess who? Look around the room. Who has the same nose as me? Any guesses? Ellen Anita Kaler, yes. And I have other friends up here too, even Viviana, or my aunt and uncle. And really, in the body of Christ, we're all related. So it's good to be here as your sister and as your friend here this afternoon. I live in Winnipeg with my family. There's 10 of us in our household. So when God puts me up to an assignment of loving the stranger among us, he gives me lots of pop quizzes. And he's like, I want to make sure you know your topic well. And as he called us, me and my husband, to start Care Impact, we had no hot clue what we were getting ourselves into other than it was a lot of work. God had called us to quit our jobs in ministry to see where can the church be between the social services, the good that many service sectors and ministries are doing, and the local church. How can we connect and equip the church? And so funny how he does that. He often gives us these pop quizzes. Any of you have been called into certain things and then he say, but I don't have time for that. Don't you know I'm studying, or don't you know I'm preparing a charitable organization? And sure enough, come on in. Then God has added to our family. We started off with 2 biological children, and then God brought us many other people, but the ones that have stuck, that had stayed as family members from a variety of backgrounds, there's 4 older girls that have joined our family at various stages, and I have 2 grandchildren. Yes, I am a grandma, also known as Ako. We are a very international family, including my husband and myself. I am obviously Mennonite and very happy to be Mennonite. And my husband is Korean, and we have 2 biracial children. And then we have children from descent from different African and Asian backgrounds. Didn't plan it, but God had brought our family together. So some of this hits close to home. Some of it is because my family walks into churches and I watch them. I can go into any church and feel at home. I'm an extrovert, so I feel at home with you, even though you look at me awkwardly. I feel at home because I am white. I'm an extrovert and I can make myself feel comfortable. I can give a handshake. I've done some peace mediation work and I know how to bring down a sniper off a roof. I can do this. But my family, however, coming from different traumas, coming from different cultural backgrounds, different oppressions, different stories that I can't even go into here today, they come into a room and they feel the snipers, not necessarily from the rooftops of Palestine where I brought them down. It was from different ideologies, different cultures, different looking strangely at different people. So part of me is, this is my mother heart speaking, and part of me is just a fellow sojourner with you in Christ. So the reason I didn't say loving your neighbor as yourself, which we all know, right? The reason I chose the loving your stranger is because we all have reasons to believe that we love our neighbor. I brought a casserole to my neighbor. I love my neighbor, right? What are some other ways that you love your neighbor? You mow their grass. That's a wonderful neighbor. I want to be your neighbor because my grass today is not getting mowed. What other expressions of loving your neighbor do we have? You bring me buns. Yes, we eat all of her buns. She's a good neighbor to us. What other expressions of loving your neighbor in your church? What does that look like? Okay, so borrowing, yes, sharing, having all things in common. We're starting to hear an Acts 2 coming. That's really nice. What else? Do you have any? How did you love your neighbor last? Sharing a banana? I told you I do awkward well, right? Yeah. I just want to make sure that I'm authentic with you. It's okay.
That is how I'm loving my neighbor.
There you go. There we go. Now, the reason I said loving the stranger, because there's always a neighbor that we can go to, always a neighbor that at least you didn't go to the back of the room. I'm not that strange, but I want to bring attention. I see you. I see you. I still love you. The reason I want to bring in the topic of loving the stranger among us is because what is also true is that there's always somebody within our communities, within our churches, within our families, within our context that we find ourselves. And I know we come from a lot of different places. There's also that stranger. And it's easier to go to the neighbor that we feel comfortable with, that is the most obvious. But how? How are we actually reaching the stranger among us if we don't even know who they are? So this is sort of the trajectory that we're going to go on today. And it's kind of like choosing a restaurant. Anybody have some favorite restaurants? What are some favorites you have? Anybody like George's Burgers? I love George's Burgers. They're huge. They're so delicious. What other things? Via House? Viet House. Vietnamese? Very nice. You go for some good pho? Nice. Any other restaurants? What's your favorite? Well, she's still thinking of it. She obviously had a really big snack. What's your favorite restaurant? Kelsey's. Anybody Kelsey fans? Okay, so when I have favorite restaurants, I like to go for very spicy Thai food. I like to go for Korean food. I like different African. We look for the restaurants that we're attracted to, right? But did you know I never even pay attention that there's an A&W right beside, just a block away from my house? Didn't even pay attention to it. Didn't even know it was hidden in plain sight. I saw, but obviously I wasn't craving that burger. I wasn't looking for those things. And I actually have been driving past it for years and didn't know I had an A&W in my own neighborhood. And that's the way it is within our community. We can go so easily to our church. We can go to the post office. We can get our groceries, and we actually don't see the person in the grocery aisle because we're not looking for them. It's not because we're being rude. I'm not trying to boycott A&W unless you think I should. It is not very good for me, so maybe I should. But we do those things in real life. So just wanted to give you a little heads up before. I'm not going to be talking a lot about Care Impact. So if those of you are wondering what is Care Impact, I just want to give you a framework of why I'm talking on this subject. Again, it's something that my husband and I started about 10 years ago. Really with a desire to connect and equip the whole church, seeing the whole church involved in the community in a very effective and powerful way. I'd come from social services, working in the nonprofit Christian sector, my husband in the prisons, and also in the church ministry side of things. And we were really trying to figure out, how do we help Christians not be awkward about being in the community in an effective way? And so that's why we do awkward really well. So there's three things that we do. Community development is one of the biggest things we look at. Looking at communities, what is the dynamics? Where are the churches? Where are the service providers? We don't need to invent new things. There's a lot of people doing a lot of good things. They know where that mom is losing her child. They know where that child is going hungry. They know where a youth is aging out of care. We don't have to do that work. We just have to work together across these sectors. That means government, Indigenous groups, a lot of nonprofit parachurch ministries, identifying them and utilizing the portal. And so the care portal is sort of like Uber. Anybody use Uber Eats? Yeah. So it's kind of like that. So a social worker can put in a need of a specific family, or a ministry could put in a need for a specific family. Participating churches can now receive that in real time and be able to, we can walk alongside them so that they can respond effectively in their own community in real time. So far to date, over 1,000 children have been served in that way just through the pandemic in a very small sampling across Canada. And we're working to develop that. The other thing is we said, if we're going to bring churches to the doorstep of this mom, this vulnerable youth, or this grandma who's now just taken in 5 children in the middle of the night because the dad was incarcerated, we've got to do something with our churches to prepare them. It's not fair for you to say, hey, Abe, can you just go over to 2nd Street Southwest and this door number and just go talk to this family. We've got to do some equipping and preparing. So we do have some different trauma care courses specifically to support churches to become more trauma informed in their programming and in how they engage in the community, understanding poverty. We go into culture and reconciliation. Yeah, we go there because there's a lot of Indigenous children overrepresented in child welfare. So we as a church have to do due diligence in becoming agents of reconciliation and understanding our part in it, as well as mental health. We see that a lot. And healthy collaboration, that's the 5th stream. And then we have a podcast, and that podcast is all the things, the conversations you're not talking about it at the pulpit, we'll talk about it at the table. And those are really fun conversations. We love the church, and there's so many good voices, and probably some of you should be speaking on the podcast of your stories, your experiences, your heritage, of what does it mean to journey in a good way. We have a lot of every other week. So if on Fridays, every other Friday, we have a new episode coming out. I encourage you to binge listen and stay subscribed so you can actually listen into those conversations. And we want your feedback. We want to do more topics. And these are things to encourage and to edify the church so that we can do this together. There's so many voices, a lot of Indigenous brothers and sisters who love the Lord, and just sharing their story. It's helped me in a profound way understand what my role is as a settler. This is the only way, the best way to get the most current information if your church wants to get engaged, or if you want to come on the podcast, whatever. Now, Jesse over here is saying, when are we going to get to those sticky notes? And I'm glad you're thinking that, because I want you to each take a yellow and a blue sticky note. Okay, get one of each. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to think in your own community, transport you down to your driveway, your neighborhood, your community, however you identify yourself. I want you on the blue sticky note to write down the name or the persona of a stranger, that A&W that you don't usually see, but a stranger that you wouldn't have brought a casserole dish to in the last couple of years. A stranger, you can even like draw a picture or whatever. So put a name or a persona of a stranger in your community. And on the yellow, for those eager beavers who are already like, I want you to identify, this is a little deeper work. What does it feel like when you felt like a stranger? Mark down a time or a place or a circumstance where you sometimes feel like that stranger. And what does that feel like? Once you're done, I want you to find clusters of 4 or so. If you have 5, that's fine. But go 3 to 5 people in a group. I want you to share both experiences, both the stranger among you and also a time when you felt like a stranger. So go ahead and find your group. So give me a few highlights of, and without maybe naming names that we shouldn't be saying publicly, but types of strangers. What were some things that popped up? Chances are there's other people that can identify. Anybody in this group want to mention a stranger that sometimes we don't see? Anybody here come to mind that we might have sometimes overlooked? Newcomers? Absolutely. There's always newcomers coming, right?
Canada, but we have a large group coming from Africa or
Yeah.
as immigrants.
Increasingly more diverse. Yes. Now let's go into what does it feel like to feel like a stranger? What are some words and thoughts that come to mind when you are that stranger? Lonely. Yes. Anybody identify with loneliness? You're feeling isolated. Yes. Good word. What else? Unknown. Yes. Vulnerable. Good.
Sometimes misjudged.
Misjudged. Right.
And as a motorcycle group, to a church in the States. I'm not sure where you get it. But we walked into this church and, you know, people just looked
Yeah,
and we did not feel welcome there,
yeah.
right?
It's interesting, right? They didn't have signs, you're not welcome, but you just feel it. Yeah. Good. Anything else? Not connected. Yeah. Cold. Yeah. Wary. Tell me more. Mm-hmm. Right. Very vigilant on your surroundings, right? Misjudged. Yeah, it doesn't feel good to be that stranger, right? And when Jesus came for us, he came so that we would not be strangers, right? And that we would find belonging. So the definition of stranger, well, there's probably many definitions, but the one of the internet, of course, is right. Someone you don't know or who does not belong in a specific place. So that's what you're identifying, right? When you felt like a stranger, you didn't know your surroundings, so you're extra vigilant, or you don't belong in a specific place. You just feel like this isn't my place. And that's a common thing. So now in your groups, read the passage together and then come up with a salient point. What do we learn from that scripture? You can read it a few times. Go ahead. So I just want you to share what passage you read from and sort of what your group discussed about that passage. What are the salient points on that?
Okay, so it's Matthew 25:35. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. So our thoughts were, this is the Lord speaking, right? Like, Lord, when did we see you? So for the person who was doing this, it was a natural thing. They weren't specifically doing, okay, now I'm going to go serve the Lord, right? It was a natural thing. They were just serving people where they saw need.
Love it. Love it. Because they are the people of God. This is who we are in our DNA.
Leviticus chapter 19, 33 to 34. When an alien lives with you in your land, do not mistreat him. The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were aliens in Egypt. I Lord your God. Just that reminder that we are to welcome people in, but also that whole idea that we were once strangers. And so we know what that feels like. So adding that to our empathy and our compassion and caring for other people, just to welcome them in and make them feel at home. And then the whole idea also, as the Israelites were set apart, how do we then bring in God into people and other lives if we're not going to show them who we are and the truth that we hold? So, I mean, there's so much in there.
Yeah. Are you a pastor?
No, not at all.
You guys paying attention, guys? Hello. Very good. No, that was really good word. That's powerful, right? We don't often pay attention to those verses.
So Romans 12, verse 13, share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality. I think we discussed, it's pretty straightforward, but we did ask the question, what is hospitality? When we didn't quite get to the final answer on that, but I think it was very much we share with all of the Lord's people. There's people of very different backgrounds, and we share with them, and we treat them with respect, and that they're welcome.
Yes.
And I to add maybe where we would go is hospitality is actually welcoming people in to your life and into your homes, and just living life with them. They're welcome.
Yes. Very good. Thank you. In that context, that word hospitality in the original language actually is referencing to the stranger. So it's not just having fuss at each other's houses. That's great too, but it's actually in reference to the stranger. Yeah.
So we had the longest passage and the fewest people in our group. So we didn't have time to
Like
discuss.
Keeners, I
but-
thought you could handle it.
But what I wanted, our passage was Isaiah 58, 6 through 11. So it's I won't read the passage for you, but it talks a lot about feeding the hungry and all about sharing, providing shelter for those in trouble. And it also talks about what was the other things that we talked? Clothing, giving clothes, and not pointing fingers at others, not spreading vicious rumors. So what we got out of there was share for those that are in need. So that's what we got out.
Good. Thank you. And right before that, it's talking about true fasting, right? They say you raise your hands up, you sing hallelujah, I'm paraphrasing, you're singing Hillsong, but you're not actually doing true fasting. True fasting is actually welcoming the person that is a stranger among you. That is true fasting. Go ahead. Sing it.
Hebrews 13:1 and 2. Let love of the brethren continue. Forget not to show love unto strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. And in our group, we were just sharing that it happened. Like, I think all of us have probably experienced it, that when we entertain strangers, they end up being angels.
Wow.
We have Jeremiah 22, verse 3. This is what the Lord says, be fair-minded and just, do what is right, help those who have been robbed, rescue them from their oppressors, quit your evil deeds, do not mistreat foreigners, orphans, and widows, stop murdering the innocent. The first thing that came to my mind is we're not supposed to mistreat foreigners, orphans, and widows, but we can mistreat our family, our friend. Like it was just kind of one of those that we do. Yes. So the hospitality part of this is what we should not be doing to people that are not part of our circle.
Yeah. How many were here for, thank you very much, Jen. You can sit. How many were here in the first session that was in this room on the life culture? And one of the salient points that I found very important out of that lesson, if I could reduce it to one main point, was that so many people don't choose life because they don't have community. They don't choose for MAID or for abortions and things because they don't have community. So you're saying, well, I've never had an abortion. I wouldn't ever kill anybody. I wouldn't ever take my life. However, the lack of creating community actually becomes a collective, not to guilt trip us, but there is a collective impact in a negative way when we don't. There's a high price to pay when we don't follow what scripture says. So we all know this. I'm preaching to the choir. The Bible isn't there of a bunch of shoulds and you better do this and like just to feel awkward. And I guess I have to because I'm a Christian. No, God knows what's best for us. God knows what's life-giving for us. And how many of you, when you have welcomed, because I know we all have, when you have welcomed somebody, a stranger into your home, or you've gone to a place and connected with a stranger and become really good friends, have also been blessed, if arguably more blessed, right? So it's better to give than to receive. Those things aren't just cliches out there. It actually is better to give into your community than to receive. And there's just so much life-giving. How many people are struggling with your churches right now and saying, oh, all these congregational meetings, and how are we going to infuse life? Or do we get new youth leaders? Or do we do this? Or do we do that? Do we get different coffee beans? We will receive when we give in the name of Christ. Right? We often say, I want more of Jesus. And we have a song like, I just want more of you, Jesus, right? Me, myself, and I want more of you, Jesus. And yet God says, go help the child. Whoever welcomes a child in my name welcomes who? So do you want more of Jesus? Who do you go to? Do you go to the Sunday school curriculum? Do you go to the coffee beans? Do you go to the building blueprints? Those aren't all evil or bad. But if you want church growth, what is the DNA of our people? Is to be welcoming, not a church growth strategy so that we can keep our doors open or to be the best church in the block, but it's actually life-giving. And we can gain from that as much as we give life to others. So no, we do not murder, but do we give life is the question. So we got 4 different anatomies. There's probably more, but I've broken it down to 4 anatomies. I want you to pick yourself in them because we've all felt like a stranger. We're going to go through each 4. So number one type of stranger is the settled stranger. So we talked about our history beforehand with Dr. Jamie Robertson, looking at the Canadian church history. For those of you who has come from the Runivaida EMMC lineage for as long as you can look back. There's a few of us. Who has come from other Mennonite backgrounds but found yourself home with the EMMC? There's a lot more. Okay, who has come from a totally different, we're talking ethnic Mennonite, not German-speaking Mennonite, but found themselves in Canada, in your community, at home with an EMMC church? Raise your hand. Okay, so I venture to say, if you haven't raised your hand, you are probably a settled stranger. Your forefathers probably came in the late 1800s. And I don't want to repeat, because I want you to get FOMO from the last session. If you missed it in the history, you got to go back there and get the recording. But the treaty land that we live on, which treaty are we on right now? Do you know? Treaty 1 land. And who lived here? Who lives here? The Anishinaabe. And then the Métis as well. And what happened on this land right now? This land right now that we're sitting on, there was buffalo, there was rivers, and there's fishing and hunting, and the people thrived on this land. In 1871, the treaties were signed here in Manitoba. And I encourage you, for those of you that aren't on Treaty 1 land, don't live on Treaty 1 land, find out what land you are from, because you settled here. All of us, by showing of our hands, we've all settled here and have landed. So a few years later, after the treaties were signed, if we're talking about this area was settled by Mennonite settlers a few years later. And this is a land that we know of: Winkler, Altona, Mennonite, Yancey, Ditseed, you know, a lot of settlement. And we're not going to go into the full history of it, but we came as settled strangers, and we have settled here, but this isn't our native land, is it? Where's our native land? Where were we indigenous to? We don't know. That's part of our identity crisis, guys. I'm doing some genealogy and trying to figure out where I'm coming from, because I've spent a lot of time with Nate at the Indigenous learning community, and they're talking about the importance of your land and your identity. And I realized, I know I'm Mennonite, but who am I? Did you know that if you do your ancestry, you're probably a bunch of stuff? You think you're German, right? I'm not even half German. Turns out there's Dutch, there's some indigenous from the Scandinavian country, there's from Spain and France. Pardon? We were settlers on that land, but we probably had babies there too with other people, who knows? You have to do your own genealogy, and Russia becomes part of who we are. But do your homework of finding where you're coming from. Because one of the things that I find interesting, if we want to befriend strangers, we actually need to know who we are. The more we know about ourselves, the more, who said this? More we know about God. I think it's Martin Luther. The more we know about God, the more we know about ourselves. So it's not just a self-help group of just get to know yourself, but understanding who we are as the image bearers of Christ helps us understand God more. And guess what? We also have more capacity to actually love who God created the other person to be, because we found our uniquenesses. So now we can find and celebrate the uniquenesses of others. So we're not just a big soup of people in Canada that just, well, we've always been here, or we've just come from Europe. No, there's rich heritage and stories. There's good, there's bad, there's ugly. We have to embrace all of it. That's what the Bible does. They didn't just give us the Instagram reel of the Old Testament, did they? They showed it all. Why did they show it? And they said, tell it to your children and your children's children and your children. We have to tell those stories of our heritage, because that is who we are as image bearers of Christ. And why do I say that as settled strange? We cannot embrace other people if we don't have a strong identity in who we are. And that's not being narcissistic. It's actually a place of humility and understanding that God is God and we are his people, and my identity matters. The second one is the estranged indigenous. So what happened? We didn't mean to, right? When our great grandparents came and bought tractors, or no, they didn't have tractors, did they? Help me out. They had horses and plows. They worked the land, hardworking people. You can't blame them. They were settlers. They were invited here. It was a place to raise us, They would be so proud to see their descendants here gathering together, still loving God on the land that they were invited to, that they worked hard for, they died for, so that we would have a good life. However, what happened was that we actually estranged the people that inhabited this land. We weren't trying to be rude. We just got that way sometimes, right? It was a passive aggression that happened within this land where suddenly now, yeah, they're in different reserves. But if we were honest with ourselves, Indigenous within the Mennonite context, often there's a stranger clash that happens. There's an avoidance. There's things that we don't even know. We're not, maybe not avoidant because we like them and we can sit with them, but we don't actually know what to say or what to do. Our heart starts to race a little. Our hands get a little clammy. We're not quite sure if we say something wrong. And yet they are people that have been estranged on our very land. And that is something that we have to grapple with. We all do. Anyone living on Turtle Island, we have to grapple with the fact of what do we do with that history? And if we recounted that now, we need to tell that to our children, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because God can be glorified. He's not threatened by our stories. So let's not gloss them over and think that we're all just coming in chuck wagons. There's good, there's bad, and there's ugly. And we have to embrace it all. But that's why there's strangers. If we want to dissolve that gap, we've got to go there and do the hard work. We've got to do the grieving that our grandfathers never did. Our great-grandfathers never did. I interviewed one of my grandpas, not the one from here, so I'm not naming names, but he called them savages. And I said, Grandpa, how could you call them the savages in Bolivia as they settled into a colony? He says, well, they're just Villa Mansion. And I'm like, it's not because he was an evil person. It was a product of what had happened and the power that we have assumed. And he was a godly person. The good, the bad, and the ugly. We need to go there if we're going to actually bring healing. Because guess what? It brings life to our community when we can get over ourselves. It brings life to our community when we can embrace the challenges and the hurts and the grief of our Indigenous people who were stripped of their culture, who were their children were taken away and put into residential schools, not just by the Catholics. There was Mennonite ones. We don't say these things. We do missions, but we project ourselves into a white Western way. We need to be on ourselves. They're Indigenous stranger. They're the ones that maybe the person that kind of stands out, awkward one, really want. They're obviously strange. They wouldn't fit into your pews very well. They're the ones that the newcomers. They're obviously wearing hijab. They're obviously speaking a different language. And those are legitimate. And I'm glad that we actually see them because we can actually make them invisible as well. We have to see that. We have to recognize it. And please don't say, my kids would tell you, so I'll just be their white mom spokesperson. Don't say I don't see color. See them who they are. See people for who they are and embrace it. Because that is the Imago Dei within them and the cultures and the stories that they bring. And let's even people with different values. Right now, probably if I mentioned LGBTQ2S+, if I mentioned that, and you were to sit down and have coffee with somebody that is queer, that is wearing a rainbow flag just coming from the parade, the Pride Parade, would they feel welcome? I'm pretty sure Jesus would have coffee. Does that mean we have to embrace everything? No, I'm not going to be Muslim just because I have a Muslim daughter. I'm not going to become gay because I'm sitting. Strangers don't have cooties. They are made in the image of God. And yet we sometimes are too afraid to go there. So embrace the outside stranger as well. And then lastly, the invisible stranger. This is the one that gets me most excited because guess what? In church growth and development, any of you read Ellen Hirsch's stuff on church development would say about church growth, we're mostly reaching 40% of our communities. All churches are going after the 40% within your communities. That leaves about 60% that are actually unreached, that we're not even trying. They're not liking our coffee beans. They're not liking our children's programs. They don't fit in, and we don't actually know where they are. They're either a very visible outside stranger that just wouldn't find place in the church community, or they're actually invisible. They might even be incognito within your church and family communities, but they could be invisible. These are the ones that get me excited, keep me up at night, because that's why we quit our job, because we knew that social services, ministries, schools, pregnancy centers, they knew the invisible. We knew Jesus did too, but honestly, with privacy acts, with the way our society goes and everything's segregated, I don't blame anyone to say that I just didn't know. We don't have a way of knowing, but guess what? These social services, these providers, they actually do know. And as we build relationships with them and saying, hey, maybe the community can help, and we build trust with these organizations, that is where they're like, this just recently, a mom was reunited with her kids because she had a church community in her neighborhood that knew that she needed a washer and dryer and a few items so that her social worker could okay it, that they could be reunified. A youth aging out of care suddenly isn't alone as he has his birthday, which should be a big celebration, becoming of age, now becomes, now I have no family. And yet there's church community that is able to wrap around, not just with a frozen turkey dinner or a casserole and a backpack, because we think it might be good. The caseworker can work with this boy and say, what is it that we need to get you in a better place? And together they can identify it, and together the church can respond. So they're not unreached, but they are often invisible. And sometimes it's within our own churches, you have invisible strangers and you don't know it. I'll give you a few examples. Those within your congregation that have neurodiversities, ADHD, mental health issues, autism, they will feel very alone. There will be eating disorders and dysfunctions. There will be obsessive OCD. There will be all these different things that people are trying their best to fit in. But what they're doing is trying to not stand out. And they can actually feel very isolated within their own community. Another sector is foster families, adoptive families, families that are actually disintegrating on the brink, and their marriages are and families are on the brink of ending, but there's too much shame to say it. So there's actually strangers within us, amongst us, that often we need to create safety for so that we can befriend them. So I'm not going to go into groups, but I want a few of you to give me some examples. Which do you identify most with? You can just shout it out. Which of these strangers do you identify most with? Probably pretty easy. Number one, okay? Any other feelings? You can have more than one sometimes, but is there anything else that you identify with? The outsider? Okay, can you explain? Okay, excellent. So what is it like, Ryan Law? Tell Wendy Park, what is it like to be in a Mennonite, Low German cultured denomination?
I feel very well.
Mm-hmm.
I say that honestly, but then I sit down at the table and people just said the Spanish and back English, and I have no clue what they say. I definitely understand it.
Yeah.
People play the Mennonite game, and I don't. I'm an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
People even talk about the Mennonite game. I don't know. No, but it's one of those things where it's just you sit there and you go, okay, I don't belong, even though I absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's days when it's better than days.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Good. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Who would you say your church of these quadrants outside of the, I'll just say all four. Who would you say your church reaches out to the most? Look at your pews. One, okay. Any other ones out there? Is there any congregation that looks predominantly like the other three? Okay. Right? Good, yeah. And your proximity matters, right? Where you're situated, yeah. You're in Winnipeg? Sure, yeah, Nassau Street. Very good. Which type of strangers are you most nervous around? All three of those, or four if you're scared of settlers. But which three would make your hands get clammy, you overthink, what am I gonna say, you know, all the things. What is it that would make you feel the most nervous about? You're nervous to say, aren't you? Number three, okay. Any other number threes out there? Number four, okay. You want to explain what?
Because sometimes you can almost smell it. You're like, I mean that.
Mm-hmm.
You see the person, and you're like, okay, there's something there, they're a stranger, but you know they don't want to be identified.
Yeah, how do you deal with it? That's exactly why we do academy work, to help us be normal about it. I talked to a CEO in Saskatchewan and oversees all the foster family stuff in Saskatchewan. And they're like, can you just help us work with Christian churches and organizations so that they don't act weird about it? That was what they asked me to do. And I'm not saying that to be like, I'm a Christian, right? I love the church, but it's awkward. How do we help, obviously, these hidden needs, when really it might just be about the way we arrange our chairs in church, or the sensory overload, or maybe it's just being chill, saying, hey, you want a coffee? Instead of, would you like to come to my program? You don't have to. Yeah. What if we just had coffee? And hey, you want to go for a walk? And so some of these things, how do we de-escalate anxiety, right? Obviously, bringing a lot of anxiety into the room, my anxiety, the anxiety of the other person. How do we be an agent of reconciliation and being the lesser anxious person in the room? And how does Bible fit into that? It all fits in, like science catches up with God. If you guys like neuroscience, you got to come to trauma care. Anybody come to a trauma care course? Of course, my parents had to. Good, because when we have it next and you're going to sign up for the insider news, we'll let you know when it is coming, because it's going to help with those things. Right? It's not so that we can just become neuroscientists and be really smart about outreach. It's actually just so that we can feel at ease. It's good for us, right? Thank you. Anything else? What other type of stranger are you most nervous around? 2 and 3. Okay. Yeah. And interestingly enough, there's such a crisis of, I wouldn't say this, the foster care system or the social service system is broken. I'm not saying it's perfect, y'all. I'm just saying humanity is broken and we're in such crisis. There's such an overload of needs that the system is overloaded with a lot of good social workers that came in for the right reasons. They're just burned out. And they don't even come to church. They wouldn't step foot in your church. But they're like, will the church help? We need some communities. They're recognizing, science is recognizing, they need ecosystems of care. And I'm like, ta-da, the church, right? If we can be brave enough, because it's hard work. It's not just about a backpack drive or a shoebox drive or a once and done soup kitchen. It's day in, day out, walking with them, walking with others who are different than us. It's actually confronting our own discomfort. And that's hard work. So we all know about stranger danger, right? We teach it to our kids, don't talk to strangers. But isn't it ironic? I didn't hear any stranger danger in the Bible. And how is it coming through in how we view our faith? Stranger danger, in a few words, is the potential or perceived risk posed by unknown people. So there's something that happens within our brain. We don't try to, but we have a stranger danger instinct. It's not all bad. Part of it is like, if there was a fire, you would want your brain to tell you, get the heck out, right? If there was a tiger running after you, would want to run instead of saying, here, kitty, kitty. There would be something wrong with that. So part of that is good, but we have stranger danger with the people that God is actually asking us to be with. Now that's a problem. So there's a few fear responses that happen. And it's actually, if we scanned your brain when you are in contact with a stranger, some of these things would fire off. It's in the primitive, who knows, the brain, the stem, the most reptilian part of your brain. It's the amygdala. And when it starts flapping, it's really hard to reason. It's really hard to be creative. It's really hard to think because we're in such reactive modes in any of these 5. So you can imagine the next question I'm going to ask you, what do you identify most with? And maybe different circumstances will bring about different fear responses. But we can have fight. And let me just get to my notes so I stay to them. You think fight, well, not us pacifists, right? Because we don't fight. But we might argue or speak strongly about certain things, certain topics. We might defend or get tensed up. We might feel under attack like that. There might be some aggressions that come out. Oh, that just gets us in the wrong way. Case in point, let's not be too holy here. Who of you has kids? You get into a fight response when they trigger you, right? It's just like, you just want to whack them, but you just don't. You're just like, you know, so that's a fight response. That's our primitive brain just telling us something's not right. The flight response, we avoid. We'll take the other aisle. We'll take another route. We get distracted or busy with something else so that we don't get to that in our day. We might dodge an issue, and we can be really good at putting things under the rug. In churches, there's lots of big elephants in the sanctuary, but let's just not go there because we're afraid. That's just a fear response. It's nothing abnormal. We all have that part of in our brain. It's just a fear response. When you have elephants in your room, that means there's fear in the house. And that's just what you're dealing with. Freeze response, don't do anything. You just kind of like, just wait for something to happen. Hopefully somebody else does something. And you just kind of stare awkward. You know, like sometimes there's strangers in the community. What happens? This is what happens when I walk through the store with my kids. What are they doing? They're afraid. They're afraid. We're a little overwhelming. We're 10 people, granted, but there's an afraid to interact, or in a church for that matter, because they're like, what is happening and how do they belong? You know, and so that's just a normal fear response. Fawn. Anybody guess what fawn is? This can be a tricky one. Sort of, yeah. A lot of these have some pretending. It's actually overly compensating in shallow friendliness. We parade that other. There are pets, there are trophies, there are ministry projects, and we're like, you want this? Okay, can I do that? You want this? Oh, we just don't want to offend, and we put them on a pedestal and other them in a different way. But why is that a fear response? Because we don't actually want to do the deeper work and go deeper. We're not able to because our fear is controlling. We know we should be friendly, but there's a pseudo friendliness that we can parade people into our congregations, into our events and stuff, but it's actually not authentic community. There's still not a sense of belonging. And that is a sense of fawn. And that is a fear response. That's normal. That happens within our congregations, within our communities. And finally, this one I put in because my Catholic friend says Catholics frump a lot, and he's a psychologist. And I'm like, I'm putting that in there because I think me as a Mennonite, I sometimes frump too when I'm in a fear mode. What is frump? And I'm sorry, Ryan, but it's being brumped. You don't like something? You're afraid of the changes that are coming in the community or in your church AGM? You're going to frump. You're not going to do anything. You might put a social media post, but that's frumping. And that's a fear response. It's normal. That actually happens when we let fear take control of our brain. And yeah, does any of that make sense? Yes. Okay. Can you identify with any of those responses? Okay. So that is the survival brain. There's also a love response, a prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain. By the way, you cannot access this part of the brain if your amygdala is flapping. Scientific proof. If you are activating your fear brain, you're not able to use the prefrontal cortex. It's just sort of having a a nap. And what does the prefrontal cortex allow you to do? It allows you to have empathy. It allows you to have relationships. It allows you to be creative and think outside the box and problem solve. It allows you to do so many things. It allows you to engage with others and interact with ideas and come up with solutions. It allows you to be friends. And I think when we were reading these scriptures, I believe that God was going after the prefrontal cortex side when we're working with aliens, not the reptilian part of our brain. And this is something that is good news for all of us, because perfect love casts out what? Fear. Perfect love, as we get to love God more, actually that fear can be displaced more. So it's actually a theological statement if we let fear reign in our brains over love. That is a theological position that you have chosen. It's not wrong to suddenly feel those 5 different things. But it is wrong if we don't choose love. God is love. If we don't choose God over our fears, that's when destruction and community breakdown happens. And we have to just pay attention to it. Self-awareness, to know more of yourself is to know more about God, and to know more about God is to know more about yourself. So just pay attention to those things that happen in your body. So I'm going to go through them really quickly, but these are some examples of your prefrontal cortex interacting with your theology of who God is. God is love. When your prefrontal cortex is activated with a stranger in front of you, that person on your blue sheet, then it's okay to say sorry for the actions of the settlers and the colonizers. We can feel safe to do that. We can feel vulnerable because love is vulnerable. It's not power. Love is vulnerable. And we can take action on things. We can be brave in those things. We can work together. And how do we journey well together? In our fear-based brain, it's all parading, it's fawning, it's pageantry. But when we love, we can go into those hard places. We can heal together. We can journey together. We can actually get to a depth of vulnerability within our families, within our congregations, within our context of people that are vastly different from you. But you will have a way, because why? People are yearning for love and to be seen and to be known. You will take more risks. This gets into attachment theory. When you have a good attachment with your father, I'm talking Heavenly Father, but with the parents is attachment theory, you are going to take more risks. You know that you're not going to be condemned if you do something wrong, that your Father is there in heaven who loves you anyway. You're going to take risks on other people. Saying, but I want to love. I'm going to take risks on people. We will get uncomfortable with generosity. I'm not talking about how much money extra do I have, or do I have an extra can of soup? I'm talking about I have no idea how God is going to provide my need, but this family needs a car right now so that they can keep their job and their family together. That's outlandish generosity. It might mean I don't have time for this. I have a report to write. My house is full, but I'm going to give anyway. It might mean that I don't have time or the energy, or I don't even have the professional advice to give. There's so many of the lack, but what is that? That is a scarcity mentality. God did not give us a scarcity mentality. He gave us a spirit of generosity. God gave lavishly, he gave his son, and he's called us to give outlandishly. And when we work from our prefrontal cortex, when fear doesn't dominate our brain, we can be those people of love. And actually, I'm going to brag on EMMC. I've seen so many expressions of generosity and love because you did not act in fear. And Mennonites, even through MCC and worldwide, they've been known for their lavish generosity, doing with less so that more can be seen in the world and more people can be served. But it's very easily seen in our own community, our day-to-day life with that stranger in front of us on our blue piece of paper. There's many reasons to be to scrimp and to save and say, I just can't. And then there's unconditional compassion, not on our terms, not on the, because they've become Christians, or because they're following our program, or they're doing certain things, whatever the conditions in our brain that makes it easier to love, we can love anyway. And also humble presence. So many times I host the podcast, and when I ask people with lived experience, and they come from a vulnerable background, whether Indigenous or they come through care or a variety of different vulnerable situations, one of the things they always tell me, my guests always tell me, is like, because I ask them, what is it that the church needs to learn, or what would you like to tell the church? And they said, just listen. They don't want to be fixed. They're not problems to be solved. They want to be heard. And so even if you want to be a frugal Mennonite, like I sometimes like to have a good deal. My husband, he's Korean, but he likes coupons, right? It's really a cup of coffee. It's not even a financial issue often. It's often just taking the time and having ice cream together. And so it's just a beautiful thing. And those are all kinds of love responses. And there's probably other things that you could think of and examples that you could give that you acted out of love over fear. So I'm going to give you, I'll give you 3 minutes. So we're going to do rapid fire here in your groups. I want you to find your blue piece of paper, the stranger that you identified. And I want you just to quickly go around the room. We're not going to go into their stories, but maybe give an example of what could be a fear response and what could be a love response. You don't have to give the whole scenario, but maybe say, I could do this or this. I'm going to shift to a different section. I won't get through everything, but I'm just going to tie it in with a few more things. I was going to talk about worldview, that we all have worldview. And the Coles notes of that is that we actually cannot always separate our own culture and who we are from our faith identity and our biblical worldview. That often is very intertwined. It's not necessarily good or bad, but it's just an awareness that our reality, our viewpoints aren't necessarily everybody else's worldview, but that doesn't mean it's less biblical. It might just be different. Okay, and we're going to look at a few things that we've actually embedded within our own faith context in North America. So I'm not picking on this denomination, but just in North America, some observations that the evangelical church, I would say Protestant and Catholic, I've been dealing more with Catholic. I think there's a lot of more commonalities once we bridge that divide. I've been having fun with that. That we actually blend in some other cultural values that actually aren't even true, as I've done some more research of the Runevida and the EMMC origins, that aren't necessarily even true of what our origins are, but it's more of the signs of our culture today that we may or may not have adopted into our congregations without even knowing that. Actually, why do I bring this up? It's not to pick on the white church. It's actually to just bring self-awareness of the things, the subtleness that sometimes creeps into our own Christianity that actually estranges others who have different stories and different origins. And so that's where you will find those subtleties. Then all of a sudden you're here, you're part of it. Oh, now I don't. And so some people have even vaster differences from our congregation. So we just want to be aware of some of the hot topics that we might deal with. And so a big word in missiology is syncretism. Anybody hear that word before? And that simply put is a fusion of diverse religious beliefs and practices. We fuse it in. Well, in missiology, this is a buzzword. This is something we look at when I did cross-cultural anthropology, and you look at, you want to dissect culture and what is faith and what is culture. In Bolivia, for example, I spent a couple years there. Our pastor friends would tell you that buying a llama fetus that's dried out in the market and burying it in the ground of a new church property and pouring a drink to Pachamama for a church launch would probably be some syncretism, right? There's a lot of different cultural animistic beliefs that are tied in with it. We have no problem saying, okay, we probably wouldn't do that because of a bunch of cultural reasons. Yet often we get this word wrong and take it to the extreme. We strip people of their unique imago Dei and say you can't play that Indigenous drum because that might be evil, or you can't smudge in prayer to God, or you can't run a church in a certain way because if we're going to do good church, good theology, we've got to do it this way. And so there's just subtleness. It's not things that we're trying to alienate people, but we actually do it without being self-aware. And so it's good to, when we say theology in churches, we often mean white theology, because we often say theology is theology, right? And there's different versions of it, but sort of ones that we will adopt. But then there's liberation theology. There's other kinds of theologies. That means non-white theology. And so we have to even be careful on being discerning and open-minded to different theologies and how their experiences, their cultures have brought a revelation of God that we haven't heard. I've spent lots of time with Indigenous people, and the rich God-fearing heart and the people, how God has revealed himself to this nation or this land far before missionaries came. And sure, there was a revelation of Jesus, and there was a lot of advancements that that has also been part of the good, bad, and the ugly. But there was an actual acknowledgement of Creator God, and a lot of these things just lined up to their own oral traditions. And we won't have time to go into that, but there's just a lot of beautiful things in there. So I'd like to suggest to us today that it's easy to jump on the worldviews and cultures of others and pass judgment on strangers of their standing with God, all based on differences from us. And so there's just a few here through that. The syncretism of individualism. Now in the Bible, there's a lot of collective language. When you look, it's our people. There were certain people, yes, called by God. David was called out, and Saul, and we have the disciples, they were called out individually, but not in the way that we have adopted it today, where it's me, myself, and I, and God, and this is my relationship. It was so that they could lead a collective group of people, so that they could bless the nations, so that there was a we collective nature of it. And yet often, if you look at even just, and I love praise and worship, and I love worshiping, but one of the things that I've paid attention to more recently is the use of I. It's like a lot of I language in our songs, in our messaging. It's like, Jesus is my boyfriend. You know what I'm saying? And it's not necessarily a we God's people. I challenge you today, whatever song, and maybe they picked the we songs. I'm not sure. There's not many. Challenge you when you're singing, change it to we and our, because it changes things. That's something that I've learned from our Indigenous Christian believers on Turtle Island. They think we and collectively. It's a truer sense of what God has intended for his people, not just we as a congregation, but we as a people around us. And so there's a lot of good values here. And so actually, how many of you have got caught up in the big pronoun thing, and you have to do he, she, they, his, and everyone's like, oh, okay. So I'm going to really trigger you guys. I'm going to suggest we put pronouns to our church, but hang on, I'm not getting weird on you. Don't worry. Changing our pronouns from me to we, to us, and our, in our language, rather than I'm doing this. And if we catch ourselves doing that, can we find ways of being more inclusive in our language, not just in our language, but in our thinking, to think our church and us and we in a more inclusive way? Because why are we doing that? Not just to rock the boat, but it actually matters to the stranger among us. The hidden among us, they will know when you feel we. They will know when they feel us. They will know when they feel our, and they feel part of that. With that even just subtle change of posture, it actually opens the door to relationships, and it matters. Marriage and family, hot topic, uncontested, right? Anything for my family. Oh, I couldn't do that because my family comes first. I can't bring people in at Christmas, or I can't bring somebody over the weekend. My mom and dad, I'm going to brag on them. They defied this. with a vengeance. Their table was always so full and their house was always so full. And now I guess I have to follow suit. But we sometimes have set, and I'm not against marriage and family. I think we have to maintain the sanctity of these things and take it with seriousness and honor that. But what I'm saying is sometimes we do it at the exclusion of our communities, and they feel it. The single people in your congregation, they are isolated when we talk like that. The people in the communities that don't have family, they don't have Vriendschap family in the neighborhood, they will feel that when that has become so much a part of our focus and our values, uncontested, because, well, it's family time. And we wouldn't want to disrupt that. I don't know. People have said, well, what's that going to do to your children, your real children, if you add more people to our family? Yeah, it's a hot mess in our home. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to romanticize it, but it's added so much value because they are learning to give and to learn different cultures. And there's so much value. Again, bringing back to the beginning, it's better to give than to receive. But yet we sometimes alienate ourselves because of that. Power and control. I was talking to a prominent church pastor. He says, we have a really diverse congregation. That's one thing. We're so friendly and we're diverse. And fortunately, I had a good enough conversation or a relationship with him so I could be frank, which I tend to be anyway. And I said, that's really good. You have a lot of flags and there's a lot of different people that look different here. That's great. But can I just lovingly tell you, it's very white. He's like, well, what do you mean? I said, who's in power? And how are you structuring things? We have to be careful we're not fawning, right? We have to be careful we're not parading and taking pride in that at the expense of really getting intimate and sharing power, sharing pulpits, sharing different kinds of expressions of music and things like that. And we can get antsy on that. We don't want to lose control. But one of the things that the good news is we shouldn't be in control anyway. Who's the head of the church? Right. So who gave us princess authority? Right? We're no princesses. We're no princes. Well, in God's kingdom, if you want to use that analogy, but we don't have special royalty privilege over people that aren't like us, right? So to share that, take risks on people. Again, risk taking is from which part of the brain? It's right here. So if your church is risk adverse, they're probably operating in fear. And that needs to be called out. And secularism. What do I mean by that? I think actually our North American church has become more secular than the mainstream society. Why do I say that? Because it's actually more acceptable to be very holistic, to be very spiritual. They might not have Jesus in it, which I wish they did. But in mainstream society, it's very good to be spiritual and integrated into everything. You have to have feng shui, right? And yet within the church, we can sometimes have this is church, this is my work, and I don't talk about this there, and I do this here. We've compartmentalized. That's the definition of secularism, is compartmentalizing things, and never the two shall meet. And so we don't live integrated lives. And so then you wonder, how come the strangers don't want to come to church? Well, we haven't brought the church to the community either, because we've been so good at secularizing different practices. And the good old safety and security. Yeah, if these slides look familiar, it's because Jamie borrowed them as well for his history, because it all ties back into history actually as well. We will rather do what is safe than what is risk-taking and taking a chance on people. We will bubble wrap, foolproof our churches. And yet God didn't call us to be safe. Even things on justice, we don't want to be like, go there, right? And yet God is a God of justice, also a word for righteousness. And I would tell you a story of Raymond and Anna. They're a great couple. They just got reunified. They're cool. And I'll just say it because I'm just saying it. This is an example of the church stepping out of these are invisible strangers nobody knew. And yet they became known through the care portal. A church embraced them. And I tell you, that church is coming alive. And now the other day, it's just like a church member said, I just went over there Sunday afternoon just to hang out. And they're just they're having fun together, they're building community, and there's just a sense of hope and not going in and out like a revolving door through child welfare and to the prisons and to the addictions. Yes, there are some repeats, but it's unconditional love. There's room for that. But yet there's still such restoration happening in this beautiful family, and it gave me permission to share their story of restoration, and it brings life when the church steps out. This matters, guys. It's not just a good idea to love the stranger among us. It actually gives life and hope and meaning, not only to this couple and to the thousands of other people like them, but also to the church.
Thanks so much, Wendy, for sharing your heart. Your heart's kind of obvious, right? But so thank you so much, and God bless.